Good morning, my name's Emma Wall and I'm a member of the wonderful Ebby family. This morning I'm bringing the fifth talk in our It Was Very Good series, through which we've been exploring what our role could look like in bringing God's life, healing and love into the world that matters so much to us. Over the course of June, we've looked at God's creation and our interactions with it and within it, our relationship with God and how we view and treat each other. To say I was overjoyed when given my subject for today would be an understatement. My subject today is prayer, and the title that I've given to my preach consists of two questions. Does prayer matter, and does it really make a difference? Take a moment to think at this point in time what your answers to those questions are. What I get a chance to share with you today is my answer to them. All that any of us can give in life are our own answers, not anyone else's. My responses will be based around verses in the Old Testament books of 2 Chronicles and Genesis and the New Testament book of 1 Peter. And some people might like to hear that, like the last time I spoke at Ebby, I've pared my slides back, but there's still plenty of photos in there for the visual learners among you. Let me begin by taking you back to the start of the year in 1969, when a woman in her mid-20s told her husband that she was expecting a baby that summer. He prayed that day and the next and the one after that. Every day he prayed for his growing child until she arrived, a huge baby, born 2 weeks late. And he prayed for her that day and the next and the one after that. Soon a year of daily prayers had taken place, then 10 years of daily prayers for his girl, then 20, 30, 40. Soon, over half a century of prayers had been prayed for her, over half a century. Up to today, I've calculated that is 20,269 prayers, and that's not including the days that he had cause to pray for her twice. What's that got to do with us here this morning, you may well ask? You see, I'm that baby, all grown up. For me, this is personal. For me, I stand before you undergirded by, upheld by, and enveloped with 20,269 plus prayers. And I don't want to take a single one of them for granted. I will never know the times that those prayers literally saved my life, or stopped me from taking a particular fork in the road, or were the light that guided me back onto a sure path when I took a wrong step off of it. I will never know how those prayers nurtured me, encouraged me, sustained me, set me free. They are the start of my answer to the questions posed in my talk's title. They are where I begin. Be in no doubt that for me, prayer most certainly matters and will never, ever stop making a difference. I'm going to talk about the verse that I've been given in 2 Chronicles 7 bit by bit before giving it to you as a whole. I'll begin with, if my people who are called by my name. It often matters to us what name we're called by. One of my Beth Moore Bible study ladies got married at Woodlands Church yesterday, and in a recent Friday morning study session, she was talking about the surname that she'd be choosing to be called for by. It was a very lively discussion, and it took me straight back over 23 years. The second person after my beloved Nan, who invited me and my new boyfriend, now husband Johnny, around for a meal, was my class cleaner, Denise, at Easton Primary School, where I taught for over 2 decades. The mutton soup and goat curry that her and husband Colvin served us that evening are still talked about in my household. After school, one Monday in July, 2 years later, I excitedly showed Denise my diamond engagement ring and described how Johnny proposed in poetry, no less, from the back of a stallion in a not-so-shining suit of knitted armour. And her first question was, what was I going to be called? For those of you who don't know, my maiden name was Scott Cook. So when I said Mrs. Wall, her reply was, Wall, as in brick wall. Ooh, that's quite a come down, Emma. I laughed so much, and even today, when given my surname over the telephone, I say Wall, as in brick wall, and I think of dear Denise. Johnny's girlfriends were convinced that I was going to insist on some sort of triple-barreled surname that he had to keep saying to them sounded like a firm of solicitors. The name that we're called by often matters to us. What name do you choose to be called by? And how do we get to be called by God's name? And what does that look like in the everyday? If we're known as those called by God's surname, I think that means we're in God's family together. Therefore, it stands to reason that we are family, in the words of a well-known song. Back last month, Johnny and I had the most wonderful and memorable example shown to us of what it is to be truly Ebby family. For over 30 years now, I've been on meal rotas when babies are born to church families and have many times stood on doorsteps handing over dishes of homemade food to shattered parents, knowing that not being a mum myself, it's something that I'll never have the joy of experiencing, or so I thought. At the beginning of May, India, one of Ebby's newest members, was born to dear friends Lou and Kev. And on our way out on a Thursday day trip, Johnny and I bought a couple of bags of M&S veg, and I messaged Lou when back home and said that I'd like to drop a roast chicken meal around at any convenient point on Saturday. What Lou replied was that what they would really like was for Johnny and I to take the food in around Olive's 5 p.m. tea time and enjoy the meal with them as church family, in celebration of the safe arrival of their beautiful girl. In an area where I've often felt excluded, I can't begin to tell you what it meant to be welcomed in to the inner sanctum, right next to a family's beating heart. And as we ate and laughed and did the business of life together, my mind went to another inner sanctum, where lowly shepherds and wealthy kings gathered to celebrate the birth of a baby who would change their world. A baby who 2 millennia later continues to change the world. A Christ child from whom we take our family name of Christians, those called by God's name. How might you, like Lou, Kev and Olive did so meaningfully, include and draw people into the beating heart of what it is to be Ebby Church family, called by God's name? 2 Chronicles 7 verse 14 goes on to say, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray. For my birthday 3 years ago, a mum and daughter called Rach and Claire Patterson, for those who remember them, gave me this notebook that straight away became my daily prayer journal. Right from the outset, I waited on God for whose names he wanted me to pray for that month. What I quickly found was that there was so often really big matters that people were wrestling with: health issues, family worries, job pressures, enormous life juggling. I have found time spent in my prayer journal a humbling experience because so many things seem beyond my control. There's so much that I seem powerless to change or even help with. But one thing I can do is regular, committed prayer. This is summed up in the reply I sent when a friend messaged me in April to say that after 23 incredible years together, her and her husband had decided to take separate paths. I wrote, "It's hard to know what to do in this time of angst and heartbreak, so I'll do what I know best. I'll pray. I'll add you and the girls straight away into my prayer journal." It's what we do with the hard parts of life, with our recurring prayers, with our questions without answers, that I think is really significant. We have to find ways to compost our pain, our heartbreak, our struggles, our questions, in a way that makes them count. Prayer does that. It's a process leaving things in God's capable hands. This time last year, I had good opportunity to humble myself and pray. Showing hospitality is very important to Johnny and I, and we have got quite proficient at loading up the cake plate with homemade treats, so to speak. But sometimes we need to give other folk opportunity to shape things, make them their own, and do things in their way that may be different from our way. I took 2 months to pray about a particular hospitality situation, and what God clearly said to me was, move the plate away. But God didn't tell me where to move it to. I did what he said and sadly tucked the now redundant cake plate away in a cupboard. Then, at Ebby one Sunday morning in early September, Karen Tett came up to the front and said that we pray for other people, but we can also pray for ourselves, that's okay. It really resonated deep inside of me, and I went home that day and put some prayers for myself in my daily prayer journal, which leads me to the next part of our Chronicles verse. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face. One of the prayers that I put down for myself was that I would have opportunities to minister to and connect with women. And another one was that I'd have cause to load the cake plate back up, and it would reach folk that it would mean something to. September ended up being a significant month. In it, Johnny and I celebrated 20 years of marriage in a variety of ways. And for one of our celebrations, Steve Allen gave us a prophetic verse from Hosea regarding fruitfulness. And at the same time, we received this impactful card from friends, which referred to our marriage tree, that they felt offers shelter and sanctuary and bears fruit for others to be blessed by. If you look closely, you will see that it actually is a door with a handle. Around that time, I preached at a church in Severn Beach and connected with a visiting couple, the wife of whom asked me to send her some things from my preach that had really resonated with her. Our ongoing contact, which continues to today, led her to send me a message that included these lines: knock and the door will be open. Open it and walk into whatever he has called you to, dear Emma. The day before that preach, Jerry and I went to a women's conference in Clevedon where Nicola Saunders talked about the work that she heads up at Spring of Hope, Bristol's women-only shelter, that spoke to me on a very profound level. And there, in the centre of September, I realised that a door was indeed opening for me, an opportunity to connect with women, just like I prayed would happen. A face-to-face meeting application form and training morning later, God called me to get my redundant cake plate out of the cupboard. Called me to load it up, not with tired scrag ends of cake hanging around from the previous week, or hurriedly shop-bought items, but with my best creations. And then God did this. And he took me through a doorway that looks a lot like this one in its own way. Me and my plate of cakes were there at the Spring of Hope's first ever smear test and health check session led by NHS professionals. And I continue to be in charge of hospitality on the Wednesdays that I'm not invigilating. By January, the cake plate was out again as we ran the marriage course in our home under the branches of our marriage tree, with a couple married for a month and another for 6 months. We're currently halfway through the next course with couples who've been married for 19 years and 21 years. Some might think that these are all merely coincidences. To me, they're not. They are clear answers to my prayers when I'd sought God on things that mattered to me. Something that I think aligns very closely with seeking God's face is inquiring of God. In Joshua 9, we read of the Gibeonite deception where Joshua and his men were tricked by a nearby people group because catastrophically they did not inquire of God. When friends approach me for help and guidance when making big decisions, I always suggest straight away that they inquire of God, and they can trust that I will do the same for them. Trust is important because sometimes when people offload to us or are in distress and worried, it can be easy to say that we'll pray for them as a platitude or as a polite turn of phrase. Let's not overpromise where prayer is concerned or pay lip service to it. If really we're already juggling too much or there's a chance that we'll forget, let's not say that we will. Last month, I was called for a routine mammogram at Southmead Hospital. Having had benign breast lumps removed age 11 and 19, and my mum having had a mastectomy, it's an area of worry for me. So I asked family and close friends to remember me in prayer for it. One of those friends messaged this to me the weekend before. Please remind me what time your appointment is. I'm going to pray every day this week for you to feel surrounded and held by God. Every day in the run-up to it, I got a message from her. They weren't long ones. They didn't need to be. When we say that we're going to pray, let's try and make sure that we do. People could be banking on those prayers. 2 Chronicles 7 verse 14 finishes, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. There is nothing at all that is passive about this verse. It's full to the brim with verbs. I fear that we want the healing of our land, but without needing to humble ourselves and trust things over to God's capable hand, without doing more than arrow prayers and knee-jerk reactions, without truly seeking God's face on things, without admitting to our sin, and certainly not being brave enough to turn from it. In our second verse, we move from being called by God's name to calling on it. In Genesis 4, verse 26b, we read, at that time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. When I read this verse, my mind went straight to a group of people who have had calling on God's name and prayer as the foundation of all that they've done in bringing God's love to our beloved city in a way that can be seen, smelt, heard, tasted, held in the hand. Right from the beginning, the Noise trustees and core team have wisely had prayer as the bedrock of all of their efforts over a crazy 24 years. As we were abroad for the Noise this year, I sent messages of prayer to key team on Friday night and Saturday morning, and by 8 a.m, Stuart sent me the most amazing message that had come in the day before from the Muller team's Noise prayer meeting, where someone had a picture of a hot air balloon looking down on our city and said that God sees the bigger picture and encourages us to do as well, for now and for the longer term. And Stu attached these photos of what he'd seen moments before as he walked from Eby to Orchard for the Noise launch. And I thought of the verse in Isaiah 40, those who wait on the Lord will soar on wings like eagles. When prayer is at the centre of what we do, we never fail to get a fresh perspective on the familiar. What God has revealed in his future plans for the Noise going forwards is way more than merely moving the cake plate. I believe that consistent, dedicated prayer and intentional calling on God's name has led the team to get out from the Noise cupboard, literally hundreds of cake plates, and has inspired them to load them up with their expertise, their experience, their prayers, their love, and pass them out into hundreds of church contexts where those church families will add to them their own wonderful quality homemade treats, to be passed around their parents and toddler groups, Kintsugi Hope courses, staff in local schools, Mentor Me meetings, senior citizens events, divorce recovery groups, church cafes, food banks, CAP money courses, bereavement support groups, and the myriad of other ways that those called by God's name show his love to those needing it in tangible ways. And not just over a sunny bank holiday weekend in May, not even termly or monthly or even weekly. This is Noise 365. This is every day of the year, opportunities to be God's eyes, ears, hands and feet in the communities that we love. That's what I call praying and calling on God's name. That's what I call rising up on eagle's wings. That's what I call fresh perspective, and that's what I call listening for God's reply to our questions. What will each of us choose to put on the plate held out? My final verses this morning are from 1 Peter 2. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. The reference to royal priesthood and being brought from darkness into light immediately brought to mind the woman who I've just studied with my Beth Moore Bible study group, an orphan girl rescued by her cousin Mordecai, who became queen of a nation. Esther, who when faced with the annihilation of her people, got a message to her cousin instructing him to gather their remnant and fast and pray, and that she would do the same. Those prayers changed everything and helped to save a whole people. I often get Johnny to make things for my session introductions, and this is what everyone took home one week. A hinge to remind the group that prayer opens doors, like it did for Queen Esther and like it did for me in September. A pivot to remind folk that prayer can turn a situation totally around. May yours and other people's prayers open doors for you in the coming season, and may prayer pivot situations in your life that need to be turned around. I will finish where I started, at the first one of 20,269 prayers. Back in July 2022, a Thanksgiving service was held at Woodlands Church to celebrate the over 52 years of tireless ministry that my mum and dad have dedicated to God's work in this city and beyond. My brother Greg and I were asked to speak for 10 minutes about the legacy left behind, and mum and dad asked me to write a poem to sum it up. I knew straight away what it would be. For me, they will always be the oaks of righteousness of Isaiah 61. I have lost count of the acorn gifts that I've brought them over the years, and they've got another load heading their way this Christmas, believe you me. Sarah Richardson was so right in her April preach entitled Prayer and Potential, when she talked about the potential in an acorn that can grow into a massive oak that lives for 300 years or more. I see oaks as acorns, long in their growing. Coupled with oaks, I wanted to include that I grew up from a tiny tot, hearing how my dad, who was an amazing long-distance runner, almost beat Roger Bannister's 1954 record for the 4-minute mile back in the day. And you might not believe this by looking at me now, but I almost beat the Henbury School 200-metre sprint record when I was 17. So my poem had to be that my mum and dad have passed on an oak baton of prayer for me to run with. And with it, an unshakable belief that prayer does and will always matter. An unshakable belief that prayer does and will always make a difference. And an unshakable belief that prayer does and will always change things, whether we see it or whether we don't. I will close with my poem, The Run. You have taught me that nothing, neither heights nor depths, neither tragedies nor sorrows, neither the unexpected nor the waited for, neither mountain passes nor seemingly impenetrable valleys can ever hold back our prayers, whispered in worried maternity suites, spoken beside our unmade, unslept-in beds, smiled in joy across our celebrations, howled in the dark nights of our troubled hearts. You have taught me that prayer changes things, whether we see it or whether we don't. And as I run, carrying your acorn DNA, through woodlands, through wildernesses, through palaces, through streams, through hospitals, through homes, I commit to always run my race set before me with your whittled oak baton of prayer forever in my hand, remembering always the glorious oaks of righteousness from which it was hewn.